1. So about 2 years ago, a friend of mine had moved into his own apartment. The sofa that was in it was old and torn, so he decided that he would try and find one in better condition. He asked me to help him look for one as my dad had a van, and we would need to use that to transport the sofa. So we went on Craigslist to have a look at what other people had for sale. We came across one that stated a 3-seater cream leather sofa, great condition, free to first viewer. There was a picture of it, and it looked in perfect condition. Now, the ads had been up for a week, so we thought that maybe it was already gone, and that they just hadn't taken the ad down yet. So my friend contacted the seller, and nearly instantly got a reply, saying that they still had the sofa, and it was available if we could collect it. I was a bit weary that it was still available. I mean, a free sofa in perfect condition that had been up for a week, and nobody has taken it yet? We thought that maybe there was something wrong with it that could only be noticed when viewing the sofa that was maybe hidden from the pictures. It was a weekend, and we had no plans, so we decided we would go and check out the sofa. My friend contacted the seller and organized a time and place to meet up. They decided on a local McDonald's car park at 9 p.m., as the seller said that he was in work until 8 p.m. and would need time to get ready after work. The seller said that he would be driving a green Honda Accord with a trailer. So we pulled up to the McDonald's car park at about 8:50 p.m. There were loads of people around, so we had no reason to think that we would be in danger or anything. At about 8:55, my friend got a text saying that the seller was about 15 minutes away, and they asked him to describe what vehicle we were in, so he described the van that we were in to him. About 5 minutes after he had texted the seller what vehicle we were in, an overweight man around 50 years old with a grey scruffy beard and greasy grey hair approached the driver's side window of the van, which was my side as I was driving the van. He was wearing a plain white t-shirt with what looked like food stains all over it, with black jeans with holes torn in them, and dried mud stains all over them, along with a pair of black steel toe-cap boots, also covered in dried mud. He knocked on my window, so I rolled it down a bit.
"You boys here for the sofa?"
Yeah?" I said to him.
"Rob's car is broken down just down the road, and his phone battery has died. I was with them, and I walked up to get you guys. He's with the car waiting for AA, but you can come down and collect the sofa off of him."
Me and my friend looked at each other, unsure of what to think.
"Can I get in the van and we'll go back to Rob together?"
The guy asked. "How far down the road is he?" I asked before he replied.
"Not too far, but I need to show you where to go."
At this stage, my friend pretended to get a phone call. "Hello? Yes? Oh, no way, really? We'll be right there," he said before pretending to hang up his phone. He looked at me and said, "We gotta go, my dad needs us to help him with his flat tire." I nodded, knowing that it was a fake call for us to get the hell away from this creepy guy. "We have to go now, but we will contact you tomorrow about the sofa." The guy just stared at us as I rolled up my window and started to drive away. Me and my friend looked at each other. "That was creepy. I got bad vibes off of that guy," my friend said. "Definitely," I replied to him. We decided to drive around the back of the car park to see if we could find out if the guy was up to something or not. We could see him standing in the same spot where we left him, and he was on the phone. He put his phone down, and about 2 minutes after that a car pulled up with 3 men in it, and he got in. My friend's phone started ringing, and it was the number of Rob, the guy who was supposedly giving away the sofa. He answered. "Can you meet me tomorrow and I can hold on to the sofa for you until then?" As he was on the phone, I noticed one of the men in the car that had collected the creepy guy was also on the phone. My friend told Rob that he would contact him tomorrow, that he was busy and couldn't talk right now. At the same time my friend hung up on the phone, the guy who was in the car also finished his phone call. At this point, I explained to my friend that there was probably no car that had broken down, and that creepy guy was trying to lure us somewhere so as the guys in the car could do God knows what to us. We drove home, and my friend blocked the number of Rob, and we never heard from them again. We reported the ad, and it was removed the next day. 2. This happened over 20 years ago. I was driving back home with my girlfriend at the time. It was Christmas Eve, and my mother's family used to hold a large celebration at my aunt's house in Estacada. This was my girlfriend's first time meeting with my extended family, but she got on quite well with them. We spent the majority of the afternoon and evening talking, playing poker, opening presents, and drinking an assortment of adult beverages. My girlfriend had been quite inebriated by the time we had to leave. Therefore, I'd be driving us home. It was around 11 p.m. or so. I was driving my girlfriend's car along Highway 211. Now, this stretch of road is surrounded by farms and dense patches of forest, and parts of it are unlit. But nothing to fear, I grew up in this area, so I knew this road like the back of my hand. The both of us were just driving and talking away, just two young lovers making the most of our moment together. There is a portion of the highway that descends down an enormous hill before crossing Deep Creek. Surrounding both sides of the road are thick forests. There are no lights. The only thing we could see was the area directly in front of our headlights. I drive down the hill, cross the bridge, and uphill through more forest. It's as the highway starts to flatten out that it happens. Something sprints across the road so suddenly that I almost hit whatever it was. I slam on the brakes. I turn to my girlfriend and ask her if she saw it. She confirmed that she had, but she couldn't make out what it was. Maybe it was a coyote, as they're a fairly common sight in this area. But something felt off about it. Whatever it was, it ran in front of the car, disappeared into the woods next to the road. Coyotes don't usually just dart out in front of cars, not like that anyway. So for some reason I decide to check it out. I turn the car around and switch on the high beams to better light up the forest in which this thing had vanished. I step out of the car and walk towards the woods. I don't see anything, but now I feel like perhaps I made a grave error. My heart is pounding and the hairs on the back of my neck are standing at full attention. But I don't see anything unusual in the trees. Suddenly, the car's horn blasts. It's not a beep, beep, beep that you'd get if, say, your driver or passenger wanted you to hurry up and get in the car. No, this was long and blaring. I walk back into the car and ask my girlfriend why she leaned on the horn like that. She said nothing. Instead, she pointed at a spot about 50 feet away from where I was standing. I looked over in that direction, and that's when I saw it. Surely this was the thing that ran out in front of our car. It was a man. He was completely naked. His skin was covered in dirt and mud, and in one of his hands he was holding a hatchet. He looked back at us and then he smiled and waved to us before turning around and walking back into the forest. Needless to say, we got the hell out of there. Once we were safely driving again, my girlfriend explained what had just happened. While I was trying to look for the man in the area he initially vanished in, he circled back around and came out from another spot in the forest, beyond my car headlights. My girlfriend had seen something out of the corner of her eye, and that's when she saw him. Before she honked the horn, he was walking towards me, his hatchet raised as if making to strike me. We called the authorities once we got safely back home, but they never found anybody. Or they did and just didn't tell us. But the officer we spoke to explained his theory. The man was obviously looking to ambush unsuspecting lone travelers for Lord only knows what reason. We all agreed that my girlfriend's, now wife's, quick thinking saved my life, as it let my potential killer know that I wasn't alone out there. I moved back to the area only recently, so I now drive that highway often. No naked hatchet men sightings yet, but I can tell you that I'm definitely extra vigilant now, especially near Deep Creek. 3. When I was about 8 years old, my parents were going through a divorce, and me and my older sister used to spend a lot of time at our grandparents' house. It's a long ranch-style home on a corner in a very nice neighborhood that's a 10-minute walk from a gas station, grocery store, and a few fast food restaurants. The streets are long and lined with well-manicured houses, cradled by big, scenic California valley hills all around. We were never very wealthy, but my grandpa bought it as a fixer-upper many years ago, and the property value has skyrocketed since then. As you can imagine, it's a very safe spot, and although there weren't many other kids in the neighborhood, it wasn't uncommon to see neighbors walking their dogs or pushing a stroller down the sidewalk outside our house. Although my mom was especially protective all our lives, this particular neighborhood was densely populated, and my family knew just about everyone who lived there. She grew up in that neighborhood herself, so she was understandably trusting. She would once in a while let me and my sister walk to the Rotten Robbie gas station on the other end of the block to go grab a snack. I would always get a ring pop, and my sister would grab a Three Musketeers before we made our way back home. My sister was about 11 at the time, and this small amount of freedom was a really big deal to us. Nothing compared to walking down that street, all by ourselves in the summertime, laughing, joking around, a couple dollar bills in our pockets. I felt like I owned the world. The one oddity I ever noticed around the neighborhood was a small camper parked on the side of the road opposite the gas station, right along the back side of the fence of another house. It sat there in the shade like a permanent fixture, all the windows constantly covered by opaque beige curtains. I can't explain why, but it always gave me this deep sense of foreboding when I'd pass it. I was almost positive someone was living inside it because, at times, I'd hear the air conditioning running as it sat stagnant in that same spot. The hairs on my neck would always stand on end as I passed it, particularly as I passed the camper door, and I'd always keep an eye on it for fear that one day it'd swing open just as I came to pass by. I think what bothered me the most was a drawing taped to the door from the inside. It was extremely messy. A sketch of odd lines in a brown pencil that was frustratingly indiscernible. I could see the outline of something, a vague shape, but could never make out what it was intended to be. I never had the nerve to stop and stare long enough to really investigate, but each time I walked by, I'd steal a glance. A year prior to the incident I'm about to describe, I was walking with my mom past a camper in the shade. We had just gone inside the park nearby, and unfortunately, had to pass the camper before we could cross the street and continue walking. I didn't want to seem afraid, so I kept on walking right behind her, and didn't object when she walked past it. This time, I felt a little more brave. I was frustrated not being able to decipher the drawing for so long, and while my mom was feet away, I stopped in front of the camper door and took a moment to really look at the drawing. Upon closer inspection, the paper was filthy. I remember doing a project in elementary school where we soaked paper in black coffee to make it look aged. And that's what it reminded me of. My mom walked on without noticing I stopped following her, but my eyes stayed fixed on the indistinct mass of dirt-caked scribbles until I could make out what looked to be a tiny, malformed face. My stomach turned. I immediately felt cold and disgusted as my eyes trailed over the rest of the image. I didn't know what kind of creature it was at the time, but now I can look back and say the drawing was a badly deformed fetus inside a mess of large, perfect circles like those made by a circular ring ruler. His face was contorted as if in pain. It was so graphically disturbing and seemed to portray this odd sense of suffering that stuck with me for days. As a child, I didn't know how to process it, and the mental image still makes me sick to think about. I'd never seen anything like it before. Adrenaline flooded my body and my chest hurt with fear. But I selfishly thought of my glorious little trips for ring pops and said absolutely nothing as I followed behind my mom. This was, in retrospect, a classically terrible idea. It's one of those things you scream at main characters in movies for. Ever since my ill feelings toward the camper had been elevated by the drawing on the door, I thought about it every time we drove by. And about a month later, my mom once again graced us with several bucks and permission to walk down to Rotten Robbie and grab our respective snacks. I thought about telling my sister what I'd seen on the way there, but she was older and braver, and I was terrified she'd make me cross the street with her to check it out. It was a bright sunny day, and I told myself with false certainty that nothing was going to happen. If I didn't acknowledge it, maybe it'd go away. We walked past the camper, and it was thankfully uneventful. On the walk back, I was feeling more comfortable and was focused on fighting open my candy wrapper while my sister walked alongside me. We passed the camper a second time, but didn't give it half as much thought as the first time. I don't remember what we were talking about, but I recall being interrupted mid-sentence as my sister softly yet firmly said my name. There was a distinct fear in her voice that immediately set me on edge, like a bucket of ice water. All my senses heightened, and I became aware of everything, including the sound of haphazard footsteps about 10 feet behind us. It was accompanied by a heavy rustling sound like a heavy backpack, and nervously I half-turned my head to look. A man with a long, unkempt beard and wearing many layers of ragged clothing stood behind us, eyes unmistakably burning into our backs as we walked. His movements weren't normal. It was a drunken shuffle, like each of his feet were unimaginably heavy and needed to be moved one grand effort at a time. His shoulders were skewed, his head tilted downward with a strange arch of his neck. I could hear his shoes scraping the gravel with every step, but rather than seemingly, genuinely intoxicated, it was as if he was intentionally meandering our direction like a zombie, with a direct effort to frighten us. Behind him, I saw the camper door was wide open for the first time in all the years we'd spent living there, and realized that this was the man who'd been living inside. "He's following us," I choked out, my eyes filling with tears. My mind was spinning as I stared straight ahead again, the wide street and sidewalks abnormally empty all around. My sister grabbed my hand. She squeezed it hard enough to hurt without looking my way, speaking carefully under her breath. "On the count of 3, we race home," she told me in a very serious tone of voice. I couldn't reply through the glowing lump in my throat, but every single cell in my body understood we had to put some distance between us and this man as quickly as possible. She began to count steadily while we walked faster, and the most terrifying part is that he started running before we even had a chance to. He must have heard her directions to me and tried to get ahead by starting to sprint in our direction before she got to 3, but his footsteps were noisy, and we bolted like deer the instant we heard him behind us. I'll never forget it. The chase felt exactly like you imagine in your nightmares, the fear your pursuer is inches away from grabbing your arm or a fistful of your hair. I pictured myself being dragged into the van with nobody around to see or hear me. We ran so fast we didn't even have the breath to scream, and peering back behind me about 10 seconds later, I saw him running in our direction with absolutely none of the impairment he showed with those zombie-like steps moments before. I think back on it now, and he may have been deliberately pretending to be handicapped to lower our guard, so we wouldn't start running. The thought of this is terrifying, but I can't rationalize it any other way. We made it to our grandparents' house, and without looking behind us, yanked open the stubborn old door before slamming it closed, and scrambling past their excited dogs to get as deep in the house as possible. I don't think we even locked it, as our main goal was getting within line of sight of any adults as quickly as possible. My mom was talking to my grandpa at the table and gave us an amused look when we bounded into the living room. Since we were kids, running around wasn't anything out of the ordinary, and she didn't ask what happened as we collapsed on the couch and tried to catch our breath. The inside of the house felt so safe, and felt in such good spirits that I didn't even want to bring up what had just happened. Like waking up from a nightmare you didn't want to talk about. I was desperate to go back to normalcy. I wanted to forget it entirely, to unwrap my candy, and act like everything was completely normal for the sake of my own sanity. And that's exactly what I did. I asked my sister a few years back if she remembered this incident. I'm 25 and she's 28 now. And her response was strange. She remembered immediately without the need for me to provide details, but she quickly waved it off and insisted he had to have been a bored homeless man looking to spook some kids, walking home with no real intent to harm anyone. I don't know. I'd like to believe it's some innocent misunderstanding, but like they always say about gut feelings, they're rarely wrong. I feel in my soul that he wanted to hurt me and my sister that day. I never told her or anyone else about the strange drawing on the door, and I'm not sure if my sister saw the open door and connected him to the camper or not. It's one of my biggest regrets, and I would hate for any other children to have been less fortunate after innocently walking past the camper in the shade. I believe he may have chosen the spot between the park and the gas station deliberately, due to the number of children walking around the area. I never saw the camper again a day or so after this. I'm not proud of how I handled this, and would encourage anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation to contact authorities immediately for the safety of others around. I don't know if maybe this whole story comes off as melodramatic, but it was very real and very frightening in a way I can't forget. So possibly deranged camper guy by the gas station, whatever your intent was, let's not meet. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories. Episode 523. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I think we're starting to get our summer late in the UK. That kind of thing where there's a bit of cloudiness in the air. I'm getting more sunshine, which is good. But there's also, because when you get the cloudiness and that feeling in the atmosphere, everything feels off. I got up yesterday, and then a couple hours later I thought, screw it, I don't want to be awake, I'm going back to bed. Felt fine later, when things were a bit cooler, so I'm putting it down to the weather. Although I'm sure chilly weather's just around the corner. I got a new mug just in time for many, many cups of tea. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.